Hey guys, for all my people out there that so struggle with feeling overwhelmed because you just have a pile of stuff that you have to do, or you're setting out to do a new project and you feel as if you have to do everything all at once, do it perfectly without making mistakes. You feel so burned out, so overwhelmed that all you want to do is quit. If this sounds like you and you're like, okay, how do I get past this way of being? Then I invite you to listen to this week's episode with my guest, Sam Laura Brown, who is a coach for entrepreneurs. And she is the host of the popular podcast, The Perfectionist Project. And I cannot even tell you what an awesome conversation this was. There's so many valuable insights and tips and wisdom from Sam Laura Brown. As a coach for entrepreneurs and another fellow podcast host of the Perfectionism Project, I would love to hear your thoughts on the quote that you shared with me, and I'm going to read that for the listeners. And then I thought that would be a great starting point for our conversation. Okay,
Let's do it.
so here's what you shared, and I love it. Personal development isn't about fixing yourself. Personal development is about loving yourself as you are and evolving because you can. There's a difference. So I love to hear why that quote was important to you. You said it's a very popular one that people respond to, I think on your Instagram and other places, I'm sure. So why is that so profound?
Yeah, it's something that I wrote to really just encapsulate what I have discovered on my own personal development journey and coaching so many perfectionist entrepreneurs as well. That oftentimes we get into personal development and listening to podcasts like this because we feel like we're broken, we're inadequate, there's something wrong with us. And I definitely got into the self-help world trying to figure out like why couldn't I do the things I wanted to do and reconciling that difference between who I was and who I wanted to be. And over time, what I've really learned is that a big part of personal development, like, yes, we can change our oh my goodness, I can't speak, perfectionistic tendencies and do all of that work. But if it's coming from a place of trying to just like move out of who we are because there's something wrong with us, like if it's coming and driven by inadequacy and from this place of I'm not happy with where I am and I can never be happy with where I am, so I have to change. That's when it really doesn't actually work because you have to also reconcile who you are and really reconcile that some parts of that you don't like probably aren't going to change that much over your lifetime. And some parts really will. But ultimately, the more that I've been able to find sufficiency with where I am and how I am, that has allowed me to actually remove a lot of resistance to change and make
Mm.
those changes. But when it was really from a place of inadequacy and just feeling like I wasn't good enough and I have to change and there's something wrong with me, I was able to like do the things to try and make those steps, but they weren't actually effective because I was trying to deny who I was. And that really just doesn't work with like the underlying principles of personal development.
Oh my God. Yes. Like I relate to everything you just said. So let's unpack that a little bit because there's a lot in there. So let's start with the part about the fixing, right? Because I so identify. I remember when my kids were very little, and right now they're 25 and 22. But when they were little, I used to watch Dr. Phil all the time and
Mhm.
then, or Dr. Oz. And
Yeah.
so I would listen and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what I need to do to fix this, or that's what I need to do. And I read all the self help books. Like you said, I've taken so many online courses and always in this spirit of I have to fix myself. I have to change myself to fit in, right? Fit in versus belonging. Brene Brown says fitting in is when we try to make ourselves be so that we can fit in with others, whereas belonging is just being who we are.
Mhm.
And the more that we do that forcing, that pushing to change and fix who we are, and you said it, it's resistance. It creates more resistance.
Yeah,
And the
and we're just
resist,
gonna take those
yeah,
thoughts with us and still have the inadequacy. We might have better circumstances, but we're still gonna have that thought pattern that we're trying to escape because we haven't actually addressed it head on.
absolutely. And so when we can loosen the grip on that resistance or that need, that idea of trying to control and fix something, and we actually, and another thing that you said is, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, is when we can come to a place, and this is like maybe the end of the episode because this is the actual answer to some of the problem, is that when we can get to a place of being able to integrate, allow, or accept all the parts of us. So, for example, to break it down and make it more tangible for the listeners, I'm currently in the process of writing a memoir. And I wrote about my puberty story when I turned 11 and my body changed. And I hated my body. I had such a bad relationship with my body throughout most of my life. And I can't sit here today and say that I love every single part of my body. But what I have been able to do is I have been able to create the space to allow or accept or include the parts of myself that I tried to change so desperately all my life. And that's what a perfectionist will do, right? I've got to change. I just can't, I have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on, and that's the difference between the personal development isn't about fixing, it's about learning to love yourself as you are.
Yeah. I find as well, and you've probably found the same thing, that a lot of perfectionism, yes, we want to be perfect, and that's like how our brain's operating, but also the main, most important thing is we're wanting to avoid imperfection. We're wanting to avoid the shame that comes from being imperfect. So, this is why I love helping entrepreneurs, particularly because how that typically manifests is we don't try things. Like when we're scared of not being perfect, and especially scared of being imperfect and others finding that out, we tend to not actually take the action or do the courageous things we need to do. And that relates to all areas, health as well, parenting, to business, that if we are just really in this place of not wanting to be imperfect and then we are trying to really resist any like perceived imperfections, and we are, instead of really embracing ourselves like we do with our loved ones. And it's so painful if you have a child or someone who comes to you and says, I don't love this thing about myself. And outwardly, you're like, why wouldn't you love your legs or whatever else it
Yeah,
is? That it's really part of it is making peace with those imperfections, so to speak, so that we can actually change them if we want to. But if we haven't made peace with them, it is really hard to change them. And I think a lot of people listening will have experienced that, where we are just in such a rush. Like perfectionists, we are often in a rush to get to somewhere better because we don't want to be in the imperfect, messy place. And so when we're coming from that energy, it just doesn't work. It gets very frustrating. We get very disheartened and disappointed and just often end up in the all or nothing mindset about things. And it's just underlying it all, like that quote really demonstrates it as well, that it's about learning to make peace with it and find sufficiency with how we are, and then changing from that place. And I love talking about how to get your perfectionist mindset working for you instead of against you, because we want to do the work to get into the growth mindset. But also, in the meantime, because that is a process, we want to learn how to actually make peace with the perfectionist ways that we think and actually support ourselves with that, so that we're not just constantly battling against perfectionism.
okay, let's talk about that then, because that's like the $1,000,000 question. How does a perfectionist make peace with imperfection? Like, it's almost paradoxical, I think, right? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to talk about in the abstract in a sense, but like it really is changing the way that we're thinking, like having different thoughts and a different perspective about ourselves. And there's lots of ways people talk about it. So we can reframe imperfection, that like imperfections are actually perfect and like that kind of thing. Or I think the most effective way to do it really is to just not try to dress it up as like this imperfection is a perfect thing, but just there's this thing that I might not like about myself or whatever. And that's okay. And that's okay is a really great starting point. And there's obviously like lots of work to do in order to really like actually make that peace. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's really an exercise that like we have to feel that in our bodies. And for myself, it has been a constant like process and journey. And like over time, I've made so much progress with that. And like being willing to be seen and put myself out there and be in the messy middle of building a business, which is all there is. You're always just in the messy middle of it all. So it's really, I think, just part of it is understanding how our brains are working and like how the thoughts we're thinking are what is creating that desire to avoid imperfection versus like we often think about, oh, it was the way I was raised or like the schooling system. And like I find that when we blame our past for our perfectionist thinking today, it's really hard to change the thinking we're having today. But if we can see that the perfectionist thoughts I'm having today are coming from my brain today, and maybe they were influenced by the way that I was parented, the way that the schooling system that I was in, and that kind of thing. But it's coming from my thoughts today, and I can change my thoughts today. And not in this Pollyanna, like positive thinking kind of way, but really like I love teaching and talking about like self coaching, investigating your thinking, and the way that like your thoughts create your feelings, your actions, and results. Brooke Casero from the Life Coach School is a mentor of mine. I'm certified with the Life Coach School as well. So like the way of bringing like any feeling, like if we're feeling like we're in a rush or anything like that, like really looking at what is the thought that is creating that feeling, because it's not the circumstance of being imperfect, if we even want to call that a circumstance, but it's our interpretation, our opinion about it. And we can do the work to actually change that. But when we try to do it in a general way, like when people are talking about just believe I am good enough, like it's just so vague that it
Yeah.
can't actually stick. Like it needs to be like looking at very specific beliefs and then picking them apart, so to speak, like countering them and really coming up with a better answer for your brain that is believable, and then believing that. And then over time, you can believe something even more powerful. But it's really just like that specific work that I love helping my clients with as well, that is really studying yourself, understanding what are those particular specific perfectionist thought patterns, and then adjusting those rather than it being this like big, like there's one thought that you can just think and then you'll feel okay with it. Or like, here are a few self care things you can do to be okay with it. Or done is better than perfect, and all those different things. Like they are helpful to some degree, but the way that I have found and that I teach my clients as well is to really look at the very specific thought patterns that you're having around a specific like area of your life, and really then unpacking those and finding something better to believe that is actually believable.
Yeah, I love that. So let's break it down then to this one specific
Yeah.
thought pattern that you mentioned a few minutes ago about how oftentimes the perfectionist will struggle to step outside of her comfort zone or to take risks for fear
Mhm.
of not doing it perfectly. And that
Mhm.
might even then lead into procrastination as well. Or, as
Yeah.
I said to you before we started, like I was always so great at being fast out of the gate. Anytime I decided, I'm going to work on this project, I'm going to do this. And I would just like, do all the things and perfectly, and then just become so overwhelmed
Mhm.
because there's so many moving parts. And I was trying to do it all perfectly, all at once. And then the overwhelm would lead to me
Mhm.
feeling burned out. And then it was just like, okay, done with this. So how did
Mhm.
you help? I know you have something two things
Yeah.
here. You have something that's called the follow through fallacy that I would love to hear about. And then two,
Mhm.
how do you help the women that you coach to really, as you say in your program, get shit done
Mhm.
in a healthier way without
Mhm.
that burnout? I love for you to speak to that.
Yeah. So, first of all, like that example you were sharing is really the typical situation that the entrepreneurs I help are in, like that all or nothing mindset, just being so keen to do an amazing job, but then getting overwhelmed by all the things there are to do, and then just like disengaging from it, waiting to be motivated again and trying it all over again. And ultimately, because in that situation, we're not trying anything for long enough to have it actually work, it just becomes so discouraging that we're like, "Oh, I just need to try something completely different," and just end up in that pattern again and again. I call it the burnout cycle.
Mm.
But just to speak to that idea of a specific thought, one of the specific thoughts you mentioned, and this is like writing down like exactly what you said, just seeing, okay, these are all the thoughts that are contributing to that. And one of them you said is, there are so many moving parts and I need to do it all perfectly all at once. So that is a good example of a specific thought. And you can look at like the feeling that creates in your body is probably overwhelm, which
Yeah.
is ultimately us feeling incapable. But
Mm.
overwhelm feels a bit nicer than feeling completely incapable. But when we feel overwhelmed or incapable, then like we don't do the things we need to do and we end up just like in that cycle. So it's really looking at like in, and we don't have time to go deep into it, but it's really looking at like when I'm on a coaching call or the way I teach my clients to self coach as well, it's looking at like that thought and really then looking at what is a different but believable way. So we don't want to try and go to, oh, it doesn't have to be perfect because our brains, that's not true. It does
Yeah.
have to be perfect,
Exactly.
but then beginning to reframe that so that we could, and actually also at the same time increasing our capacity and capability and our self-image around what we're capable of doing. Because a lot of times perfectionists, we're so scared of feeling helpless that anytime we think this could lead to me feeling helpless, this could lead to me feeling incapable, we'd rather not attempt it because we're scared to find out that we're not actually capable, rather than just being like, okay, let me see what I could do, or let me break this down. There are like all different thought patterns that can be believable for our brain, so it doesn't take a lot of work to adopt them, that can have someone going from, there are so many moving parts and I have to do this work with myself all the time. My brain just wants to feel incapable because that feels familiar and comfortable, even though I'm a very capable person, as most perfectionists are. And so it's okay, what can I do to increase my willingness and capability and capacity in this area? How can I approach this with curiosity is often a great way to look at it. I wonder how many things I can get done. I wonder if there's an easier way to do this, because oftentimes we want to do it the most complicated way because we associate that with being the perfect way. A question I love is, what would this look like if it was easy? Which is a question I got from Tim Ferriss, which I just think really helps to remove a lot of the overcomplicating that also like contributes to the overwhelm. When we have a self-image of being someone who gets overwhelmed, we overwhelm ourselves and do things in an overwhelming way. So there's like that work to do as well. But it's really being able to look at, okay, what is that thought, feeling, action, result pattern that is happening? And then playing around, it's like trying on different thoughts, like you're trying on clothes. What's a different thought I could think about the same situation? For example, it could be like, there are 17 things to do. It's like not this amazing thought, but it doesn't create this feeling of overwhelm unless we say there are 17 things to do and I definitely can't get them all done because there's not enough time. But if it's, there are 17 things to do and I'm considering the possibility that I could do them, or I'm considering the possibility that only 5 of them are needed, or we can begin to shift out of that like all or nothing perfectionist thought
Yeah.
pattern into a more growth-minded, calm, sufficient, as in we're feeling sufficiency in what we're capable of,
Yeah.
mindset, and it really changes the way we show up.
It really does. And I'm loving what you're saying because I have been applying that way of thinking, or at least that energy, to this memoir that I'm writing. Because I'll slip into an old thought pattern of, oh my God, there's so much I have to do. How am I ever going to get it done? Oh my God, this freaking, I'm never going to be able to do it. And then I pause and I remind myself, because I've been teaching myself this for a long time, Kim, one step at a time, Just
Mhm.
easy does it. And just like when I say that, even now, I feel my body just relaxing one thing at a time. Easy does it.
Yeah.
Follow the breadcrumbs. I don't have to know all the steps all at once. I just need to know the next step. And I remember when I read Glennon Doyle, I think it was Love Warrior. And I remember she was
Mhm.
talking about when she was going to leave her relationship and she felt so overwhelmed. And she just kept saying to herself, what's the right next step? And when I
Yeah.
approach my book that way, it is unfolding beautifully. It's
Mhm.
unfolding absolutely beautifully. But when I get into that other space, I become frenetic and frenzied. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I gotta do it all. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, there's just like bringing our brains back to I'm capable and like those thoughts that help us create that capability. And just to quickly mention too, another thought that has been really helpful to me as an entrepreneur, but like really in all areas of life as well, is that I'm not the best judge of what's perfect. Like I've recorded so many, like hundreds of podcast episodes, and my brain will be telling me the whole time and after it, that wasn't good enough, you spoke too much or not enough, or you didn't say that, like all of that, like self-criticism and like nitpicking, which has gotten a lot better over the years, but it still happened. And the episodes that I often feel like the best about because I feel like I spoke well or whatever, they're the ones that tend to resonate the least. And the ones where I'm just like showing up and being myself and here's what I'm thinking about, or here's what I helped a client with today. And I'm just really speaking from the top of my mind. Those resonate the most. They grow my business the most. But my brain, like I'm too close to the value. The thought is I'm too close to the value of what I'm creating to be able to see it. And so that thought really helps calm my brain down when it is criticizing work that I've done. And I want to keep going and keep putting it out there and doing my things. And I know I would barely produce anything if I listened to that perfectionist voice in my head. So it's just like, I actually am too close to it to even see how valuable it is. The same with
Mm,
a memoir. Like if you're approaching it, if you did it with that perfectionist way to approach it, you would probably not share the best stories that you have. And you would probably remove out all the bits of you and just have it be this like really polished, put together thing versus something that's more raw and real and really just connects and shares. And so I just know as well, my perfectionist brain isn't the best judge of what connects or what's quality. And it's just trying to meet a different criteria, which is do I look good? Do I sound smart? Like all of that, and that isn't actually what often creates the most valuable thing. So
yeah,
that's been a really helpful thought pattern for me as well.
that's a huge point because you're 100% right with the book. When I made the decision back in January that I was going to get a ghostwriter to help me do it, this is like no joke. This is how it happened. I sent him 20 years worth of my journals, which of course are
Mhm.
my deepest, most
Yeah.
raw, vulnerable thoughts and feelings. I mailed them to him and he took my journals and he wrote the memoir.
Mhm.
And a part of me was like, wanted to puke, right? Because I was
Yeah,
like putting myself
100%.
out there, right? But at the end of the day, I've been doing this podcast for 4 years. And at the end of the day, I've had to do enough inner work and healing to get myself to the place to be able to really take my mask off. And I just said to myself, you know what? My mission is to help other people. And if I can't take my mask off and be honest, be transparent, be vulnerable, then what am I doing here? So I knew I had to share those parts
Yeah.
of me in this memoir, and it'll be released in October. And
Same.
it's going to have some really talk about the perfectionist wanting to
Yeah.
cringe. And I guess that is a true testament to how much I have recovered
Yeah.
from perfectionism that I'm putting so much of my messiness in
Mhm.
that book of how imperfect I really was, how unconscious I was as a mom, how unconscious I was just in general. I was just a hot mess. And then to show my growth and where I am now. But that's really what you're trying to say is that a perfectionist doesn't want to do that. Like, will hide all that and
Yeah.
self criticize all the time.
Yeah, another thing that helps me that relates to this too is there's a saying I heard that what's most personal is most universal. And that really helps me because on my podcast, I share a lot of my own experiences with perfectionism, particularly as it relates to business, as I'm helping entrepreneurs, but also motherhood and other things like that too. And it takes a lot of courage to share. And over the years, it's become cathartic in a lot of ways to have a place where I can share those things. But that thought of what's most personal is most universal really helps me like connect with my clients, but also with my friends and my family, and just knowing like, if I'm feeling this way, oftentimes the people around me are feeling a similar way, probably about different circumstances, but the feelings are very similar. And a lot of the stuff I share like that, people are like, oh my God, that's me. I 100% relate to that. And it's always the stuff that my perfectionist brain just would rather not share. And hey, like everything's fine over here. But I do my business the way I do and share the way that I do, probably similar to you, because it's not helpful to hear someone being like, look at me and how perfect I am and I've got everything together. Like I was just craving hearing from people who are like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have really good intentions to do it in a way that's in integrity and that I am really just trying to be my best self, so to speak, but also be okay with how I am. And here's me making an effort at that. And I love just documenting that journey and sharing that. And so many people are on that similar journey as well. So I know that by me
100%.
sharing all the here's this thing that I tried and that failed and I made this mistake or I did this thing and then I like was really unhappy with the way that I made that decision because it actually wasn't in alignment with my values and I thought it was like all of that kind of stuff. It really is so helpful and it gives so much permission to others, like what you're doing with this podcast, to take the masks off and to be like, hey, like none of us really know what we're doing. We're all just figuring it out. And like we're all having this messy experience. And the more we can share that with each other, the more permission it gives other people as well to be like, hey, yeah, me too. I used to do that or I used to struggle with that. But when they think we're perfect, then I don't want to share that with someone who's perfect. So it really is a lot of like emotional regulation and emotional safety and courage and vulnerability to be able to share it. But I think it's really commendable. Like you sending your journals off because one of the fears I have is if something happened to me and then everyone's gonna see all
I
these
know.
journals with like my pettiest thoughts ever in them. I'm like, oh my God. And it would all be fine. But
Yeah.
also that is such here are my like internal like petty, scared, fearful, like inconsiderate, whatever thoughts that I have. And to share that with someone else and then have that written up into a memoir is amazing and definitely a testament to the work you've done to be able to do that. I know it like how that feels. And it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, when you say that thank you, by the way. When you say that out loud again, it's oh my god, it's a reminder. And right now it's a little bit safe because it's still just a manuscript in Google Docs and it's not out in the world, but I know I'm gonna be totally fine once it is out there. So tell us a little bit about the follow through fallacy.
Yeah. So that's really just a concept that, and it ties into what we're speaking about with the burnout cycle, that when we are trying to follow through with our plans just by being more motivated, it just doesn't work. And we're just taking like an unhelpful approach. And I didn't even initially know when I started my business that I had that perfectionist thinking. I thought I just had a motivation issue. Like I was like, if I can just stay motivated to show up on my blog, that's how I started my business, show up on my blog, post consistently, like I'd write about, I just have this motivation issue that I just can't stay motivated. And it was really actually doing the work and investigation to actually realize, oh, this is what perfectionism actually is. It's not that perfectionists are perfect people who actually manage to do that. It's, oh, I want to avoid being imperfect and all of this and feelings of shame. And just really starting to understand the thought patterns that were creating me not feeling motivated, so to speak, and understanding how to get my perfectionist brain working for me instead of against me. So I teach a planning method or a productivity method really called power planning, which is really designed to help someone, and I use it myself and my clients do too, to help you get out of the I just need to like have this long to-do list and be more motivated and try harder and be more disciplined. I'll wake up early, I'll stay up late, I'll eat lunch at my desk, like that kind of approach that we take when we're in the all side of the all or nothing mindset, to instead actually look at to-do lists, like paper planners, like all of that, it doesn't actually work for our perfectionist brains. And you need to actually plan out your week and then have a strategy throughout the week that actually supports your perfectionist thinking so that we don't end up in this follow through fallacy, which is, I just need to try harder. I just need to work longer. I just need to be better, or I just need to be prettier or more articulate, or whatever that looks like specifically for each of us. That it's, oh, I actually just fundamentally need to change the way that I approach getting shit done and that I approach showing up. And I need to actually, instead of just trying to be more motivated, look at the plans that I'm trying to follow through on. Like, are those plans even set up in a way to help me succeed? Do they include a lot of unessential busy work, which typically is the case when our perfectionist brain's in charge because we want to be busy, but we don't want to be vulnerable. So we want to do this like productive procrastination. So it's really
I
about
love
understanding
that.
it's not just like a motivation issue. And so if anyone listening in any area of your life, whether it's health and fitness or anything like that, if you're just constantly trying to be more motivated, we've all experienced that doesn't work. Motivation doesn't last. And especially for perfectionists, because when we try something, like anything worthwhile, you're going to have to do it for longer than you're going to feel like excited and motivated. And our motivation dips when we're trying something and we don't get the instant result. Like when we're in the messy middle of I'm putting in a full effort and I haven't gotten the result yet. This is why we like do a fitness challenge for 3 or 4 weeks and then completely fall off. It's because I'm putting in a full effort. This should be working. I'm scared to find out that I'm not good enough, that this is a waste of effort, that I can't actually do it. And I haven't got the result yet. So I'm going to just quit so I don't have to find out I actually couldn't do it. I'm going to go back to week one and be more motivated next time. And I've been in that cycle so many times and learned how to get out of it, and was actually just really learning, first of all, that trying to be more motivated, trying to be more disciplined, to wake up earlier, stay up later, to work longer hours, those things don't actually create the result of doing something for long enough to have it work. And so a different
Yeah.
approach is needed. And so, yeah, people can listen to my podcast to hear more about it, but it is really important to understand motivation isn't the answer. And if you keep Googling how to stay motivated or looking at things like that, it's like we're barking up the wrong tree and it just gets so frustrating. So I love helping people understand that's not what we actually need to solve for.
Yeah, I love that because I think about myself when with my own to my checklist. I love lists. Like I have a long list.
Mhm.
And but here's the difference. I would show up with the energy of I have to get all this done. I have to do more, pedal to the metal, 24/7, go do. Now I still have a list that I have, but I try to reframe the way that I think about the things that are on my list rather than, oh, I have to do this or I have to blah, 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 or hurry up just to check it off. I try to infuse the things that are on there with, oh, I get to do this. Or even if it's something that I don't love, this particular thing is going to lead me to something that I do desire. So looking at it from a different lens or a different energy helps to just have a different outcome as far as that goes. But I do have a question though, which is again, according to the things that we put on our list or the things that we're doing, how do we know for sure that when we're doing something, whether it's a business or it's a podcast or it's a job, that it's something that we truly want to do
Mhm.
versus something we think we should be doing? Like, I can sometimes, as much as like sometimes I really can tap into why I do the podcast. But then there
Mhm.
are times where I'll be like, am I still doing this 4.5 years later because my perfectionistic brain won't let me quit and won't let me let go of it? Like, how would somebody know if they're doing it from a true desire versus that perfectionistic brain?
Yeah, I think the most simple answer, which is the one that we don't want as perfectionists, is like to trust yourself to know, to
Mm,
trust that if you're having that thought, maybe it is the case that you feel like you are just doing it for part of that like perfectionist, I should be doing it kind of reason. But I know that myself, I have gotten into over the years, so many different times where I'm like, am I self-sabotaging or is this what I want to do? And like that kind of questioning. And now what I have seen is that questioning actually just stops me from being like, I'm gonna trust myself to know, and I'm gonna review my decisions so that like future me is gonna come back and be like, oh, actually, here's a distinction to make. And this will help you trust yourself more because now we've learned the difference between this feeling and that feeling, or different things like that. But when it can be like, I can trust myself to know if I'm doing my podcast because I want to, or if it's because of predominantly a perfectionist reason and I don't like that reason, but I can trust myself to know what my reasons are and if I like those reasons. And when we approach it from that place, the answers usually become pretty
Yeah.
obvious. But when we're in this questioning mode of, is it something that I want to do? Or is like, and it's from this place of trying to make ourselves wrong as well. Often, like when we are being productive and doing things, we're like, oh, but maybe I'm not doing it perfectly enough. And it's just, I can trust myself. Like I am going to have to trial and error it and figure it out as I go. And over time, things will reveal themselves. But in this moment, I can trust myself to know that I enjoy doing the podcast, and maybe there are some perfectionist thoughts that also have me want to be doing it. But mainly, I also love sharing via podcasts. And so I want to keep doing it. And so I think it's just bringing it back to, and it's like the ultimate work, I think, for perfectionists is like the emotional safety and the self trust, and being willing to say, I don't have to constantly question and interrogate myself. And I don't constantly have to like oversee myself and police myself and nitpick myself.
Mhm.
Like I can actually just trust myself to operate in a helpful way. And from that place of trust, we actually are able to see when we're doing something unhelpful, but when we're just nitpicking at ourselves. If you imagine a boss micromanaging you, like you do not do your best work when someone's over your shoulder being like, oh, what about this? What about that? Or is this, it just doesn't help. And so if we are nitpicking ourselves in that same way, and questions like that have really good intentions, and I've asked a lot of them myself. But when I saw like that ultimately was me not trusting myself to just know, is this self sabotage or is this not self sabotage? Is this helpful or unhelpful? When I'm just like, I know the answer to that, and I will update my views on that and recalibrate my definition of helpful or unhelpful or whatever along the way. It just has removed a lot of that mental drama and mental chatter around it. And it's allowed me to make such better decisions because I don't feel like future me, it's like this fear of judgment from our future selves being like, oh, but what about this or what about that? And then we don't, like we freeze up because we're scared of judgment from our future self instead of support.
Yeah, I have to tell you that, first of all, that was so helpful for me. First of all, thank you for that,
My
because
pleasure.
what I noticed is what was key for me with what you said, so many good things, but the part about trusting myself, and that is the muscle that
Mm,
I have been developing within myself, is to trust. And I do know that at the end of the day, I can trust myself that if I'm done podcasting, I'll know it. I
yeah.
will know it. The problem, I think the reason why I even asked the question is it's not whether I love podcasting, because I do. I love connecting with you right now. I love having this conversation. And often the way I will do my interviews is I'll do 4 in a day, and then I'm batched for
Mhm.
the month. And the guests will say to me, "Oh my God, how do you do 4? Aren't you exhausted if I'm on number 2 or number 3 or even number 4?" And every time I say no, if anything, my energy level get
Mm,
escalates with every
me too.
interview I have, because I'm so
Yeah.
excited and I get so invigorated by what I'm talking about. It just juices me up to talk about it. So from that standpoint, I love what I'm talking about. I love connecting with other people. So that part I love. What will often lead me to question is the overwhelm, going back full circle, the overwhelm or the burnout that I feel from all the behind the scenes stuff that feel I have to get it all done perfectly. The interviews are one thing, but then I'll have to make sure in that day I do all the show notes, I do all the things perfectly. So that's what's really underpinning, is that my perfectionistic brain comes online and says, Kim, you gotta do it all now and get and be perfect with all the things. And so then that's
Yeah.
when I feel like exhausted or overwhelmed. Do I still wanna do this podcast?
Yeah, and so there's practical strategies, like, I have someone who does all that stuff for me,
Yeah.
and in the beginning, I was like, I have so much to share and say, and when I think about the work that has to happen for that episode to get in the hands of others, it makes me wanna not record anything because I
I
know
know.
as I'm recording, like, I'm gonna have to do all this stuff, and so I did it for, like, the first 30 episodes, and then I found someone, I was like, "Here's my process, can you just do this bit?" So all I need to do is record it and upload it, and I don't, like, edit things
Yeah.
out of episodes or things like that, except if I'm coughing or whatever, and so there's, like, the practical strategies, but also my hunches to where to look as well is, like, maybe some discomfort around things being easy and letting yourself actually have a really easy experience in total around podcasting because it probably feels like, how could this actually be a thing that I just get to do this and
Mhm.
talk to people and it's helpful for people? Like my brain loves to do that. And a lot of perfectionists, a lot of the work I help my clients with is really allowing ourselves to do it the easy way and to let ourselves be helped and supported. And even if we've been typically a self sufficient person, to really allow others to come in and help us and just see, like, where can I support myself as well? So this could be easy. So I can be completely energized by the podcast. There might still be some little things that need to be done. But if there are certain things that are constantly draining for me, am I even that good at them? Like for me, I'm not even the best person to do certain bits of it, but also the opportunity costs of that. So I think there's like that and like for perfectionists, like looking at our willingness to be in an easy experience because we feel like if I can do it myself, I should do it myself and all of that side of things. So yeah, that's a whole other piece.
That's a whole other piece that at some
Yeah.
point we should have another conversation about that because that's a very important piece as well because that's not your very typical trait or characteristic of a perfectionist, or at least what people think about a perfectionist,
Mm.
but it's a very big part of a perfectionist is that
Hmm.
piece that you just spoke to where we don't allow things to be easy, that everything has to be hard and we have to figure it out and do it all ourselves
Yeah.
and be uber competent, the uber competent woman. Like that's what I'm super uber competent. People come to me to get
Yeah.
shit done all the time because they know Kim will. Right.
Yeah.
So where can listeners find you?
Yeah, the best place is my podcast, The Perfectionism Project. And also, I think we can link it up in the show notes. I have a training on power planning, which is like a productivity tool or method to support you with getting shit done. And really, a big part of it is understanding yourself and your mindset and like using that process to also study yourself rather than just trying to be more motivated or trying harder. So, particularly if anyone is an entrepreneur, I highly recommend checking that out. And yeah, on Instagram, I'm at Perfectionism Project.
Yeah, awesome. Definitely will link that up because I think that's what's so key is to help others to who are listening to get shit done in a healthy way, not in the
Yeah,
unhealthy, unproductive way that we just outlined in this whole episode. So, well, for sure, we're going to put that in there.
amazing. Thank you so much for
Yes.
having me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Sam. This was so good. And thank you for helping me at the end to come to
My
that
pleasure.
kind of realization. Okay. Well, there you have it. Another episode in the books. And this one was with Sam Laura Brown, a coach for entrepreneurs and the host of the popular podcast, The Perfectionist Project. We covered so much territory in this episode. We talked about impr- what it's like to be and well, there you have it. Another episode in the books. And this one was with Sam Laura Brown, a coach for entrepreneurs, as well as the host of the popular podcast, The Perfectionist Project. We covered so much territory in this podcast. Honestly, I really felt like we could have done a part two. There's so much packed in here. We covered things like the, ah, Okay, there you have it, guys. Another episode of Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists in the book. And this was with my guest, Sam Laura Brown. She's a coach for entrepreneurs, and she is the host of the popular podcast, The Perfectionist Project. And there was so much valuable information in this podcast. We covered so much territory. There's so many things that were covered. And I really do hope that you found value in what you heard. If you have any questions, have any comments, please share, reach out. And, we talk so much about perfectionism. And if you're still wondering whether or not you are a perfectionist and to what degree you can take my quiz on my website, kimgrosscoaching.com. And there's a part for the perfectionist. There's also a part for the people pleaser. Very quick quiz, but gives you lots of information and it will surely help you. So if you also would like to have further support, you can email me as well. That's all on my website. You can book a call and I can chat with you about what you might be struggling with as far as perfectionistic tendencies and or people pleasing as well. Oftentimes the perfectionist and the people pleaser will go hand in hand.